Welcome everybody who's joining us. It's the top of the hour and we've been quiet, not talking for a moment. So your audio is working. So we're just going to give it a moment as our participants arrive into the webinar and we'll get started in just maybe a minute. So thank you for joining us. And we're watching those participants climb. It looks like we're leveling off a little bit, so we are expecting some more people. But we'll go ahead and get started. It's about a minute after the top of the hour. So welcome. Welcome to Communicating the Work of Transforming Grace in 2024. My name is Robert Cogswell. I am the Director of Communications for the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange and a member of the CWR Education Committee. I'll help facilitate today's session. Before we introduce our panel, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping, our familiar explanations about what we're doing with recording and so on. But before we do that, as is our tradition, we'll start with a very brief prayer. So bear with me as I share my screen. Okay. God of grace, abide in us as we venture into a new year in an era of culture wars and political polarization. Enable us to change this environment. May your abundant love take the lead in all of our relationships, conversations, and care for one another. Guide our gaze to look each other in the eye with dignity and respect. Remind us that the vulnerable person for which we hope to advocate is the person across from us at any moment. May transforming grace create paths of collaboration, creativity, and communication. Amen. Bear with me while I fix my screen up a little bit. Okay, so as many of you are familiar with CWR webinars, we are viewing and hearing our speakers only. So we're not viewing all the attendees' faces like we sometimes do on a flash conversation. We will be asking or opening things up for questions at the end of our session today. So if there's something suitable to the moment as the segments are progressing, we may raise something if it's appropriate during one of the panel segments, but we'll have the Q&A time at the end as well. If we can't get to everyone's questions, if we really get rolling on conversation and we're at the top of the hour, you can always follow up with Sister Anne Marie, who is not only a member of LCWR staff, but she is also a CWR member, so we can connect with her. And if there's something that needs to be forwarded to Sister Carol or Sister Bridget, then she will take care of that too. So we are recording this session for later viewing on CWR's website. So if you have to step out or want to recapture something that was said, you can revisit the session on CWR's website. Okay. Oh, and Brian is excellent at putting things up in the chat. So please be sure to look at the chat and add questions there, add comments there, but see the resources that Brian puts there as well. And use the Q&A features too. When we get to the Q&A session, we'll call on you to our best of our ability as we see you raising your hand, and we'll go from there. So let's get to our panel, because you don't want to hear from me. You've got this fantastic panel from LCWR with a wealth of experience. So please join me in welcoming Sister Carol Zinn, who is Executive Director of LCWR and who has served in leadership of her congregation and represent the Sisters of St. Joseph as a UN NGO rep. Sister Anne Marie Sanders, whom you all know, is Associate Director for Communications at LCWR, has served in that role for a long time, 20 years, And before that was director of communications for her own congregations for a number of years too. And Sister Bridget, who's new to many of us, but really we've been seeing her a lot with the people participating in transformative grace. We're getting more familiar with her. Her background is in education as a teacher, principal, dean, and head of school, and most recently served as executive director for the Stewart Center for Mission in Washington, D.C. So thank you for welcoming our distinguished speakers, and thank you, LCWR team, for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away, Sister Carol.
Thank you so much, Rob. Well, hello, everyone, and let me just echo the gratitude back, really, from the three of us. We are really honored, just really honored to be with you this afternoon. And also, let me say thank you for the specific ministry that you offer to religious life and to women's religious congregations in particular. You are remarkable, just remarkable. When I was in leadership, worked closely with our justice person and our communicator, and it is a commitment to have that three-way connection, but it was so rich in my own experience. So I want to thank you for the incredible ministry that you do. So we're going to spend some time today with you. Thank you for asking us to do this as we launch this. So let me just say, in terms of launch, we have launched this, if you will, back in November, the first week of Advent. But if you have not participated in any of the, prayer services and so forth, not to worry. Guess what? You're always welcome. And Sister Bridget and Sister Amory and I will have, maybe some how-tos. So do not worry. No one's ever too late to join the movement of the Spirit. So, next slide. Thank you. So as you know, the initiative is Transforming Grace, the Work of Transformative Justice. Why are we focusing on this? And in particular, the roles of leadership, communicators, and justice promoters. Well, I hope in my couple sentences ago, I gave you a little hint about that. It seems to us that in every congregation, in every institute at this moment in time, these three roles are key in terms of the work that needs to happen within the congregation, and then the message that is sent out to the larger public. And so these three roles are responsible for that ministry happening within the institute and also getting the message out, as we might say. And so we're joining many, many other people. We're not creating this by ourselves by any means. It is clear to many people on the planet that we are in a new moment of evolution, and we are really evolving into a new future. The images from the Webb telescope alone just take our breath away. And the scientific community often comments that those images tell them how little they actually knew. Point, we are really constantly evolving and learning. LCWR finds itself in that moment also. You may typically think of the justice work in particular for Catholic sisters as really being direct service, which of course we still do. Direct education, immigration services, going to the border, schools, healthcare, clinics, the whole poverty agenda, all of that is true. And we still do that. But over time, the Catholic sisters that belong to LCWR and others around the world, I don't ever want us to be positioned as elitist, where a lot of other people are thinking about this. But sisters over time began to realize that the need for direct service was connected to the systemic change that needed to happen. Economic and social, corporate structures that were in place were actually creating the need for poverty relief and women's empowerment and all the direct services. Over time, the sisters in LCWR in particular realized that in this country, our systems are set by our federal government in terms of federal laws and then, state laws. And so 50 plus years ago, some 47 sisters who were LCWR members at the time gathered in Washington, D.C. And the short story is they brought into existence Network, the organization Network that does political advocacy. We never left go of systemic change, and we never left go of direct service. But in time, in an evolutionary path, we began to realize there is more unfolding from direct service to systemic change to political advocacy. We now join many, many, many other people, and I'm sure all of us in this conversation today, that what is needed now seems to be something other than just direct service, systemic change, and political advocacy. In fact, anyone with whom we speak, and I'm sure the same is true for you and the justice promoters, people are scratching their head in this country, in the political election cycle that we're in now, in the church, on the planet, whether it's climate change or racism, whatever the issue is, people are scratching their head saying, what else do we need to be about in order to bring this world to a place of common good and compassion and justice and so forth? The response that most people are saying is, we need a transformation of our thinking. So this image, and we're grateful to Sister Elizabeth Sweeney, who created some of these slides and graciously offered them to us to share with anyone who is interested in this journey. This is a zigzag, if you will, of the development of how humans think. All the way down at the bottom, that archaic beige kind of square or circle rather. That's the level of consciousness where humans are concerned only about their safety and survival. And I often like to say, if there was a fire right now in this office, God forbid, I love you all very much, but Anne-Marie and Bridget and I are going to run right out of here, because what will kick in is safety and survival. But over time, that's not enough. So over time, we go to, larger levels of thinking, to a larger tribe, for instance, the Catholics or the Irish or whatever it might be. And then it kind of zigzags back and forth, different levels of thinking. What's important to remember here, go back just for a second, Bridget. What's important to remember here is if you could draw a line right down the middle between that turquoise and goldish dots, right down the middle there, separates these two levels of human thinking into tier 1 and tier 2, level 1, level 2. Okay, thanks, Bridget. And where the science and the psychology of human development is pointing us now is we are really moving out of tier 1 thinking, which is pretty much about me and mine and what I can do and so forth. And only at the end of tier 1 do we start to think about the common good. Tier 2 is all the public we. Who are we? And the science is telling us that this level of thinking, could you go back another slide just for a second to that zigzag? Notice the two top dots. We're only talking about the last 50 years, 75 at the most now. So we're talking about very recent time. Okay, thanks, Bridget. So where we're moving or where we're being drawn in our faith tradition, the spirit is prompting us to be thinking about how to think in tier 2, which is always about the spiritual intuitive knowing that transcends and includes rational thought. Now that sounds all wooey, as my grandniece would say to us, but it really is this interior knowing. It has to do with the cosmological awareness. Go back, Bridget, please. Has to do with the cosmological awareness that this planet has been around for 13 billion years, and we are part of that. There's a global system of economy and governance, not just my own bank account, or not just the United States economy. Everything is connected globally. Tier 2 is capable of holding multiple perspectives. This is a real challenge. Oftentimes we at least I do, I surround myself with people that think like me. That is not going to be helpful at this moment in human development. I have to be able to develop the capacity to hold multiple perspectives, not agree with them, but hold. Okay, thanks. Next one. So here's just and we can make these slides available. Tier 1 and tier 2 is just a clear image of, look at what tier 1 is about. It is about the ego, which is all good. Please notice my tone. This is not to critique. This is just this is what it is. Tier 1 thinking is about domination and having power over someone or something. It's about the I. It certainly prefers pleasure over pain. It doesn't want to be stretched to think of another opinion besides my way. It measures life by the story of me. Everything is about me. I look at the news and I only see what I see, and so forth. Tier 2, as you see, is another whole description that the power, if you will, is for communion. It's about the we that we're able to build. It's about welcoming any state or experience that if someone else has. It's about being able to say yes to what is. My story fades because I become part of a larger story, which means my own story gets larger. I don't disappear. And the skills that are needed are compassion and persuasion. So again, back to the zigzag. This movement, like I said, go all the way back 250,000 years to the archaic. And that's the description that's given, from the social science. I am never going to be free from protecting myself. Like I said, if there's a fire, I'm out of here. And I might drag Bridget and Anne-Marie with me. That's never going to go away. But I can't operate from that level when I'm trying to be in a conversation with Sister Bridget and Sister Anne-Marie. It's not appropriate. But another thing to remember, next slide, Bridget. This is another image of that zigzag. All of these memes or all of these levels, if you will, they're all assigned a different color, they all move in and out of one another. But each level has to be integrated and kind of nested within us like a little Russian doll. I have to be able to tap into that safety and security. And I have to be able to say, when I'm in a conversation that's pushing that button in me, I have to be able to say, uh-oh, I'm trying to protect Carol here. When I'm having a conversation with somebody who simply is thinking differently than I am. So we need to be able to transcend and include, move in and out of these levels of thinking where appropriate. What's important, I think, is, go backwards. I'm sorry, Bridget. What's important is that last dot there, that the center of gravity, this is what the science is teaching us and what God has, our faith tradition has always said, the center of gravity, where we're held together, the center of our gravity of our culture or our community pulls us up or pulls us down. So what LCWR is trying to make a small contribution to is how can we, as members of the human race, how can we cooperate with this movement to pull up, to be able to have a way of thinking that thinks first about what we used to call the common good, thinks first about the we, knowing that if we attend to the we, all the individuals within that whole stratification will all be encouraged and affirmed. The opposite is not true. If I think only about me, you think only about me, we all get together and we just create a big me. Next one, please, Bridget. Thanks. So integral consciousness, which might be other language that you've heard for this tier 2 work is really at its heart very spiritual work, which is why it's so challenging for lots of people, especially in our culture, to do. But look at the positive thing that's listed here. We need only 10%. You need 10% of the people in your community or 10% in your family. We need 10% of Catholic sisters. We need 10% of Catholics. A very small growing edge that is drawn to move towards this integration. And at this integral piece, we're all pulled to comprehensive solutions, not right-left, not Democrat-Republic, but inclusive of both. Now, I've been watching some of the recent stuff with the election, so I know you're probably saying, yeah, good luck with that, Carol, but the work is to work towards that inclusion of both, not either or, both and. So our work as religious congregations, as LCWR, we really believe that through contemplation and looking at our own interior self and our shadow, to deepen our capacity to give and receive love, and that the evolutionary spirit of the universe will be something we make some small contribution to. So we're kind of back where we started. Hopefully, say Bridget. So instead of direct service, systemic change, political advocacy, and transformation of consciousness, what I've now shared with you is tier one is one way of doing this work, whether it's justice work or communication work or leadership work. I'm going to skip over LEAP for a minute. Tier two is where we're being drawn into an evolving future. And so the work is between tier one and tier two, which was referred to as a leap of transformation. That's what this work that LCWR is engaged in. That's what it is. It is the leap of transformation work to help more of us get to tier two. Bridget's going to say a little something about leap of transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you for this opportunity to be with you today. Just like to invite us for the next couple of minutes to think about what helps us to take that leap of transformation. I'd like to suggest today that it is the invitation to engage together in the work of transforming grace. I offer today 6 possible ways that can encourage this leap of transformation for us individually, collectively, in our communities and institutes, in our local environments, and globally. So let's pause for a moment and think what helps us to make this leap from tier 1 to tier 2. First, being grounded in our gospel values, in our commitment to contemplation. Secondly, bringing with us the open mind, able to learn and to encounter new information. Our open hearts that bring a spirit of discernment into this new kind of learning. Our open spirits that allow us to look not only at the individual, as Carol has described, but at the collective. Third, a leap of transformation needs generative listening, the kind of listening that allows us to set aside our own egos or our own ways of thinking so that we can receive as well as we give. Fourth, a leap of transformation is helped when we are ready to be in discomfort. Am I willing to cross that bridge of my own comfort zone, to step outside the tables where I feel most welcome, and to receive an invitation to the tables where perhaps I have seen myself as unwelcome? Or the leap that happens when I'm willing to welcome someone new who may be missing from the conversation. Fifth, in the leap of transformation, we remain teachable. We remain able to learn and to let go of that which has given us our assurance and to stand in the midst of unknowing, grounded in the contemplative. And sixth, that we can cultivate the skill set of the resilience required for unknowing. Can we respond from that place of being uncertain what the pathway is, but certain, grounded in our gospel values and the contemplative life, that still small voice? Can we know and unknow at the same time? Can we show up with our mind, body, and spirit? Pay attention to what we receive and what happens within. Tell the truth to ourselves and others, and allow ourselves to live in the space of being detached from the results. As the Sufis say, in the leap of transformation, we show up, pay attention, tell the truth, and we're not attached to the results. And so now I'll invite Anne-Marie to help us do those things.
Thank you so much to both Carol and Bridget for laying out the imperative for this work and what it takes to do the work. And what I'm going to be talking about is the specific call to and readiness of women religious to contribute to this evolution of consciousness. And the basis for my part of this webinar is an article that LCWR published in its journal Occasional Papers. And that was written by Liz Sweeney, whose slides we used earlier. In that article, she lays out why women religious are particularly poised to contribute to this important movement, a movement that's really needed for the planet's survival. So she even says, contributing to this shift in consciousness may in fact be the imperative of our time and the most important thing women religious can offer the world. A pretty strong statement. So I'm going to underscore some of the ways that Sister Liz notes in her article that speak to the elements of religious life that have given us a particular set of skills and practices that we apply to this work to shift consciousness. So I think we as communicators, it's especially important that we be aware of these practices. So there are many that we could talk about today, but I'm going to talk about just 5 of them. And the first one is reading the signs of the times. So if you've been working for a religious congregation for a while, you probably know that women religious were deeply impacted by the Second Vatican Council. And one of those impacts was the Council's call to read the signs of the times. So what exactly does that mean? In general, the call to read the signs of the times refers to our responsibility to be well informed about all of the important political, social, and economic events that are taking place in the world today. To be aware of them on that global level, national level, and local level. So Catholic sisters take that obligation quite seriously to be informed of the events occurring around us and to understand their significance as well as their deeper meaning. So we do that with a view that looks at the theological, spiritual, and ethical implications of what's happening. And for Catholic sisters, because we live a communal lifestyle, we read the signs of the times together, and we discern their significance together, and we try to make decisions from what we see. And Bridget, you could go back to that other slide. So for example, if we watch the news about the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, we try to go further with what we're learning. We seek understanding about why the wars are taking place, who is being most impacted and why. We ask about our own responses to these situations. How do we respond from gospel values, those values that Bridget talked about earlier, when we speak publicly about these situations? Who might be impacted negatively by what we say? How do our choices for our charitable contributions, our advocacy, our purchases, and more impact this situation? And we ask, what does all of this mean for future generations? How will what is happening today impact their lives? So we try to engage in this kind of study and conversation with one another from that level of integral consciousness, one that appreciates differences and values above all the common good. So for communicators, I would say that understanding how your own sisters read the signs of the times is essential. It may differ from congregation to congregation, but it's from this understanding that you'll want to craft messages and statements in the name of the congregation that look at these bigger questions from that lens of integral consciousness. So a second element of our lives is this communal life. So sisters have developed skills that I think at times we may not even be conscious of as we live this communal lifestyle. As you know, this way of living is very countercultural, especially in the United States. The idea of holding all things in common, of contributing our salaries to a common pot, of decision-making in common where all voices are valued, of assuring that each member of the community has what she needs, even if it differs from what others need. All of these skills are a natural part of our lives. They are also precisely the skills that can be key to making this societal shift to a higher level of consciousness. So as you well know, sisters gather together frequently for a number of purposes, sometimes for education, sometimes for discernment about matters that impact our mission and our lives, sometimes for communal prayer and dialogue. We prioritize being together because we believe that when we're listening together to one another, it's there in that exchange that the presence of God's Spirit is often manifested. And manifested much more so than if we were praying or learning or discerning alone. So again, Liz Sweeney notes, next slide, Bridget. My experience with groups is that this inbreaking of the divine happens often and readily. Our work is to expect it, be alert for it, and especially to take time to dwell in those moments when we are touched by something more. So we suggest that as communicators, you find ways to speak about your sisters' meeting and gathering in the context of this work to shift the consciousness of the world. So you may want to note not just that your sisters are meeting, but why they meet together. And the belief that when we discern with together, that we have greater wisdom, that the collective discernment leads to something even greater. So a third element, and both Carol and Bridget refer to this, is this living from a contemplative stance. So the desire among women religious over the last couple of decades to live from a contemplative stance seems to just keep growing stronger and deeper. So basically, this is a call to live in a way that makes listening, observing, and noticing a priority. You know, at times it may mean that we're in periods of silence, intentionally slowing our minds and hearts, just so that we can become more aware of God's presence and purpose and desires. But a contemplative stance involves much more than just being quiet. Living from a contemplative stance implies that we live with our questions and challenges in a way that integrates facts and feelings and our values. Living from a contemplative stance means being open to discovering God's presence in places and situations where we might not have expected God to show up. So as women religious become increasingly practiced in living from this stance of greater awareness and observation, of prioritizing listening, we really are creating the conditions for this shift of consciousness to take place. This is the way of being that makes that shift possible. So again, as communicators, you can find ways to talk about the contemplative aspects of your sisters' lives so that what they do and how they do it connects to the work of shifting consciousness. So a fourth element is practicing contemplative dialogue. So most likely the members of your community speak at times about contemplative dialogue, or they may call it contemplative conversations. So in brief, contemplative dialogue involves a slower moving conversation where the priority is listening, where we allow for silence after one person speaks and before another starts, where we intentionally try to find commonalities in what we say and build on those commonalities as the conversation continues. So we enter into this kind of dialogue, not desiring that our own position or our own thinking is final, but rather we desire to arrive at what we don't know yet, or arrive at what we already know, but with added wisdom. We ask ourselves throughout contemplative conversations, what's the discovery that's unfolding among us? What new possibility might be arising? So this approach to conversations is again essential for the shift of consciousness to take place. These are conversations where there's always a desire to find something new, quite different from most of the conversations that take place in our society today. So again, for communicators, you can communicate the why behind what your sisters are doing when they have these kinds of conversations, and explain that this practice helps the shift of consciousness. And then finally, the fifth element is steeping ourselves in the gospel that Bridget referred to earlier. This may go without saying, but women religious, we've spent our whole lives studying and praying with the scriptures. So the values embedded there, care about persons most in need, integrity, compassion, humility, and much more. Those values become deeply ingrained in our lives and are hopefully the values that drive our actions. So here too, communicators can make the connections that these are the values that the world needs to make this shift of consciousness. So in conclusion, just want to say that personally, I find it very exciting to realize that this way of being that we've been practicing, all of us who are in religious life, since the time we entered our communities, this way of being provides us with the skills that humanity seems to need most right now. So women religious can and really must contribute to this movement to the next level of consciousness, of being part of what Carol referred to, that 10% of the population that helps to nudge humanity to this higher level, to a higher stage of being. So I find that it gives me a reason for being and for living this life, knowing that every action I do, if done with intention, can help better the world. So I'll end by returning again to Sister Liz's insight that she notes in her conclusion. This is a direction in which our years of living in community, praying contemplatively, participating in communal assemblies, and even undergoing the purification of aging gives us a blessed advantage. So Carol, Bridget, and I would like to share with you just briefly some examples of how we try to work for this transformation of consciousness in our work here at LCWR. So Bridget, would you start us off with that?
Thank you very much. I was just taking in the ways that what each of us has spoken about feels ever more deeply connected and invites us in a real and tangible way to step outside our own roles and to work for the collective. And to see that each of us has a contribution to make, as well as a way to shape the thinking of another. So I was thinking, as I was reflecting about this very question of how this plays itself out, one of the experiences that I was thinking about was right at the time that in October, when Palestine and Gaza came to the forefront and the tragedy happened and life was lost, the three of us spent contemplative and dialogical time on what was the response of LCWR. Not just what kind of word might we use to describe it, but in this work of transforming grace, what is it that calls us forward to provide a way to be with one another? And we each provided some contribution to that, so that we chose actively not to make a statement, but to speak on behalf of the work of the transformational consciousness and our hope for the global community. Each time that we speak on behalf of LCWR, we're choosing to speak from the lens of intersectionality. Where do we find the root causes? Where is it that this movement from tier 1 to tier 2 calls us to be? How do we let go of a singular view and make it collective? And so Anne-Marie brings a particular lens with her, and in our fashioning both the words and our way of being present in the world, I think it gets stronger. And Carol brings the leadership of a much larger view. And so it becomes something bigger than a singular statement, but becomes a collective opportunity for voice. And I would just say, as a side note, that's not always easy. There are moments that it would feel easier for me to sit in my own office and write something and send it out. But that's not what this movement is about. This movement is about walking the talk and being willing to take the time that is necessary to do something different, so that we can in turn be those who invite something different more broadly. So, Anne-Marie?
Thank you so much, Bridget. They were great examples. The example that I thought about that I wanted to share is how I go about planning an issue of our publication, LCWR's publication, occasional papers. You know, our issues always revolve around a topic. So when I solicit articles for an issue, I always try to ask the writers to not only write about the topic itself, but then to make some connection in their articles between the topic and this need to create a better world. And then when I lay out the publication, I usually include some subtitle or perhaps a question that highlights this connection. So I'm just going to pull out 3 examples from the latest issue of Occasional Papers. And this is an issue that looks at how sisters understand the concept of mission as being different from ministry. So 3 of the subtitles or article summaries that I wrote were these. So what might it mean for the world we serve if women religious lived from the belief that our mission is the call to love? So again, it takes the topic of the article, which was this call to love, and asks that question, well, what does that mean for the larger world? How would that impact A second, if our true work is to love the world, what spiritual practices might help us open to what the world needs us to be? And a third, what impact might we have on the world if we lived from a place of awe? So in brief, I try to use any opportunity I can find to make connections between what sisters are doing and how we're living with this work to better the world. And I always think of my work, and I think of our work, all of our work as communicators for women religious, as one of translation, where we make efforts to take whatever the topic is that we're communicating about and translate it into these concepts of transformation. I know I often don't use very much of the language that we heard today, but I use concepts like improving the world, responding to the needs of the world, working through differences, honoring diversity, and more. So I'm going to ask Carol to share an example from your work.
Yeah, thanks, Emery and Bridget. Actually, what I thought of was the work we have done to even be on this call right now. We have sat together and we each had to find time on our agenda. So for the leaders and the justice promoters and the communicators, it has to be a commitment, to find time on our individual calendars to come together. And every single time we sit down and have a conversation, I feel my own thinking stretched, which is part of the work right now, but it's also not easy to do. So even the way we're experiencing this time together today is not the same. And I'm not saying we changed the agenda dramatically, but this experience on this Zoom call is not the same experience we had sitting at the table in the conference room the other day when we did our final walkthrough, The reason that came to me was because of the time commitment, the need for me to go in with some clarity about what do I bring. As the executive director, I walk through a particular door that neither of you walk through, and each of us can say the same thing. But as the executive director, I'm looking at a house whenever I come to a task that we're doing. What is the whole picture in a religious congregation, for example, beyond just the communicator role and the justice promoter's role. However, my learning is I have got to spend the kind of time in each of those conversations with those discrete roles in order to really more fully understand the larger house. And so it sounds like it's self-serving, for me to make the time to be in these meetings and certainly be here. And I don't mean this as this is a burden of time. I don't mean that. The example is this work takes time, and it takes commitment, and it takes intentionality. My experience has been in this that we've done now for several months in preparing all of this work, starting back in the last spring, almost a year ago. The richness of it is way beyond what Carol Zinn would ever bring to any of this work. And so my learning is that there is a learning by doing, and to trust the intentionality and the integrity of each person who, quote, comes to the table.
So we're going to shift just a little bit to talk about, unless we want to continue. Does anybody want to say anything else? I didn't want to shut you off.
Conscious of time also.
I know, that's what we're going to shift just a little bit to talk about this specific work of transforming grace with an eye to the role of communicator, and to address a few of those things that I would call my own frequently asked questions. So in this work of transforming grace, this 12-month commitment that LCWR has made, we have 4 movements. These 4 movements, which extend from November 2023 to November 2024, is the LCWR contribution to the dialogue relative to the US presidential elections, but specifically focusing on this question about what is the work that's ours to do. In a moment, I'll show you the dedicated page that Anne-Marie created so that this work is publicly available to invite all kinds of groups to join us. Our first movement, Transforming Consciousness, began November 29th and ran through the Christmas season. We have just begun the work of Transforming Presence, which is a more direct cultivation of those skills necessary to do this work of the leap of transformation, and helping us to identify our action and response related to division and polarization in ourselves and one another. Transforming Care is the movement from Easter through Pentecost, as we remind ourselves that each of us is a creation of God, and we are called to love, serve, and care for one another. But what does it mean as we accept that those we might identify as being the other are those loved and cared for by God? And finally, Transforming Practice, which extends from June of 2024 through November 2024, including the LCWR Assembly, which will invite us to practice these skills that we have learned on behalf of our own constituencies, our institutes and congregations, and the world at large. Just as a reminder, on our LCWR website, you'll find that there is a dedicated page to Transforming Grace. And when you click it, you'll come to a reminder of this information that I have just shared with you. And each of our weekly contributions and tools and reflections intended to provide a group of any kind the opportunity to come together, to reflect, to learn, most of all, to share in contemplative dialogue on behalf of this work. And so I think we are ready to invite Rob to help us then to engage a wider community in our circle of conversation.
Thank you, Sister Bridget. Yes, I was looking at our time. We've got a little bit of time left, but time for some Q&A. I haven't seen anyone popping anything into the chat or to our Q&A feature yet. So I want to give people an opportunity to do that. There must be some questions out there about what is ours to do with all of this tremendous amount of information that you've shared with us. One thing that I would like to ask of the panel is just a sense of what you might be hearing about the weekly reflections that are available on the site. Are you hearing feedback that they're being implemented throughout various congregations, or?
Want me to jump in? Sure. Thank you, Rob. I'll just say that yes, we hear from a variety of members of LCWR, as well as a wide variety of communities that are using them. And they're being used both in segments, in small pieces, and as a weekly process. There are a number of communities and institutes that are sending them out to members weekly. They are not prepared a long time in advance because they are intended to be responsive to what's happening in the world right now. So they don't replace some of the congregational liturgical year reflections, but they are specifically intended for this work of transforming grace. So.
All right. Thank you. And Angie popped this into the chat. Have any congregations started a group or groups, and how is it being received? I think you addressed that. Murphy has also commented that a group of communicators and justice promoters in Illinois and Wisconsin are planning some messaging around the two conventions, nominating conventions this summer. Does LCWR want to be included in planning for that? That's a big question.
Well, I'll just tell you that I was on a call at 9 o'clock this morning on that very topic and have not had a chance to talk to Anne Marie and Carol about that yet. So
I think what I would offer to that, I appreciate that the justice promoters and the communicators in both those states are attentive to that. I would say from my leadership hat, do not have that conversation without the leaders. And secondly, that message will need to be very carefully crafted if it is coming in the name of Catholic sisters. And so, Bridget, I would say, at least from that perspective, while the communicators are not LCWR, when you send something out that has sisters connected to it, many people just see that as LCWR. So, so thank you for letting us know. Glad you're in that conversation, Bridget. But I would caution that if something at this level, because it's already polarized and it is going to get more polarized and really hot and so forth. It will take a lot of very careful contemplative dialogue, as Bridget was saying about this statement with the, the war in the Middle East. We spent a lot of time. What are the words that we want to say that conveys what is the message that we want to give? So I would just offer that. So thank you for picking that up. Thank you for seeing if LCWR does want to be included. I would just put in a commercial here that as we move forward with this 3-person team, none of these kinds of activities can move forward without all 3 persons involved in the conversation. And from the leadership perspective, like I have here at the executive director of LCWR, there are other things that I am aware of simply because of it's what on the other side of my door that neither Bridget nor Anne-Marie are. And so, and especially in this political environment, that will have to be a 3-way discernment for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. We're close to the top of the hour. So as we're not getting a lot of chat and questions, maybe just to throw something out to our group, building from Sister Beth's comment, what is it that you might be doing with this in your area? Maybe you can share some examples of how you're working through transforming grace. Sister Mary Lou says, Region 1, Justice and Peace Promoters and LCWR Region 1 are meeting monthly on Zoom. And they shared how we are working with transforming grace. So there's connectivity happening there. If I can offer maybe one question to the panel as we go through the year, I imagine we'll be gaining a lot more connection and experience when more people meet in Pittsburgh later in the spring. But over the longer picture of this election year, what is ours to do or to continue after the general election? Do you see this, as we've said, this is going through the course of the year and up to that time later in 2024, how might you see things continuing?
Well, what comes to my mind right away is that, first of all, because it was 2024 in an election cycle, we didn't decide to do this work because of the election cycle. We discerned that this was the next step for us to take in terms of the justice agenda. And because it happened to be an upcoming election year, we used that as the context. So I would just like to make that point clear that the context for this work right now is the election cycle, because that's where we are. The context after November 2024 is certainly not going to change in that the political context isn't going to go away, but there is the context of the synodal church. There's the context of climate crisis. There's the context of how to make meaning out of all of the struggles that are going on in this country alone. So everything needs a context. So I'm happy for this question because I would not want to have the incorrect connection made that this was created because there was a political election cycle in the United States. No, we were going to do this anyhow, even if it wasn't a political cycle, but because it was the time of an election, we're using the context of that to kind of help people see what are the polarizing challenges in this kind of context. There's still going to be other contexts that will happen after November 24th. So this will continue, obviously, after the election itself. Thanks for your question.
Oh, sorry. I would just say really quickly, Rob, that I was previously a justice promoter for my own congregation, and so I bring that experience to this collective work. It's my hope that there's no going back, that this work that we're doing is going to shape the future and create the path, but that this commitment that I hope we're making to one another as elected leaders, justice promoters, and communicators to, as Carol described, take the time, do the work, and make the commitment to walk collectively. So we don't know.
Right, thank you. We're at the top of the hour, and I just want to respond to Susan really quickly, and actually Brian did that too. Yes, there will be a recording afterwards that will be available on the CWR website for members. Michelle offered a great question. Maybe that's how we can close it out. As groups are implementing transforming grace, is there some place we can share ideas about how things are rolled out and being implemented and learn from each other?
We don't have one now, but
Okay.
I'll take that under advisement.
Good question.
It's a great question. And yes, we want to collect that collective experience. I just don't want to say that there's a mechanism right now to do that, but there will be, that will be forthcoming. And certainly April will provide us that.
I would also add that, as the Region 1 said, that they are, working together. I would hope that whatever the communicators are able to do together would be able to be gathered, so that when we do create a mechanism, we would not receive this from this communicator, and this is there a way that the communicators can have some networking among themselves to see what are the learnings that the communicators as a body might be able to bring forth. I would think that would be really very, very helpful. But thanks for the question.
All right, thank you. There's a couple other comments in the chat. We're a little past time, so I thank you, Dusty and Stacy, for your comments about examples happening in your area. I think we're going to wrap up though, and I do want to say thank you to LCWR for offering this webinar for us, and hopefully clarifying our thoughts and thinking around what is ours to do related to transforming grace. As we often do, we will have a survey following the webinar, and the recording will be available on the website. And remember that you can reach out to Sister Anne-Marie if you have any lingering questions. And before we go, I also want to remind you that next week we have a panel conversation for Catholic Sisters Week, next Thursday, January 25th. There's no registration required for that one. And as we move forward, you can also be on the lookout for news about CWR certificate program, CWR awards, and of course, our 30th anniversary conference in Chicago in October. So until next time, thank you for being here. May you continue using all of your incredible skill sets and imagination to assist our congregations in being a transformative presence in the world today. Thank you, and stay warm.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.